Hey, what's up guys? It's Tip, and welcome to Shadowfang Keep. Shadowfang Keep is a level 22 to 30 dungeon located in Silverpine Forest on the continent of the Eastern Kingdoms. Now, because it's located in Silverpine Forest, the walk to Shadowfang Keep for Alliance players is going to be very, very long, which is why, honestly, a lot of Alliance players don't actually do this dungeon. They just skip over it. If you chose to level in Duskwood instead of the wetlands, you're going to have to walk from Loch Moran all the way through the Arathi Highlands, all the way through to South Shore, and then finally to Silverpine Forest, which is going to take you a pretty darn long time, which is why a lot of Alliance members actually skip this dungeon. But if you're Horde, it's pretty close by. You can just take the Zeppelin from Orgrimmar, which will take you to Undercity, and then from Undercity, you can walk to Silverpine. And if you're undead, well, it's even closer for you. There are 6 quests associated with Shadowfang Keep, and I'll put them up on the screen right now. Because it's located in pretty much a Horde zone, you're going to find that the majority of quests in SFK are actually Horde exclusive. Now, recommended classes for this dungeon. As always, a warrior is recommended for tanking, and I don't think I'll ever not recommend a mage. Just Polymorph and Frost Nova are so good, especially at lower levels. So definitely bring a mage if you can. And finally, believe it or not, SFK is probably one of the few dungeons that a paladin tank can actually be somewhat decent, and that's because of the quantity of undead in the dungeon. Now, I don't recommend you bring a pally over a warrior tank, but if you do want to tank as a paladin, this is probably one of your better opportunities to do so. Now, I want to talk to you guys about this dungeon on a little bit of a personal level, especially if you're considering pursuing game design as an actual career. Study this dungeon because it is so well crafted and so well designed. I can't even believe it. In fact, it's such a good dungeon that not only is the vanilla version really good, so was the remake that was done in Cataclysm. Of course, SFK was revamped in Cataclysm, and that version is really good too, especially at the time. So it's just one of those places that, for whatever reason, clicks so well and captures the classic essence of what a dungeon should be in an MMO, in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you guys through some of the coolest parts of this dungeon, as well as the bosses, and we'll get into the guide portion as well as we go along. But I'm going to stop in this video a lot and call out some really awesome things, because these are things you just don't see in WoW today, as well as a lot of other MMOs. First and foremost, the fact that you can actually see the entire dungeon before you enter the instance portal. Some of my favorite dungeons, including the Dead Mines or Zul'Farrak, they're great, they're fantastic, they're some of the best dungeons I've ever played, but you can't actually see them in the physical world. Shadowfang Keep, you see the keep before your eyes, before you enter the instance portal, and as a result, it puts you in this different mood, it puts you in this different setting where you feel like you're actually going into this castle instead of zoning into some random game zone. The second thing I want to talk about is something you'll notice right away. Look at this. You can't even walk into the dungeon right away. This is one of the coolest things that's ever been implemented in games, period. The concept of previewing content before you can actually get to it. A lot of games do this. Multiplayer games, online games, offline games. A lot of games, you'll zone into an early level, and you'll notice that there's a really cool piece of loot or a really interesting area that you can see, but you can't necessarily get to right away. I love that idea of previewing content, showing the player right away that, look, there's something cool, there's something interesting, but it's behind a wall, and you're going to have to figure out how to get there yourself. All right, enough fanboying for a second. I'm sorry about that, guys. I get excited about this one. I really do. It's one of my favorite dungeons in the game, and I think you're going to see that as we go through the run right now. A quick thing that you good observers might notice, I actually will switch between groups in this dungeon. The reason for that is about halfway through this first run, I accidentally stopped recording. I pressed the hotkey and I just stopped recording the run. So this first group is a lower level group, an under-leveled group, primarily around level 21 to 22. That's pretty much the average level. In fact, I think I'm the highest level in the group at level 24, whereas the later group is a pretty much over-leveled group. So you're going to see the difference between strategies and approaches as I switch through the groups in this dungeon. But for the first half of the dungeon, we're going to stick pretty much primarily to this under-leveled group so you can see what to expect when you're coming into this dungeon at the appropriate level. So here we go with the first pull. We're pulling a Black Org and a Shadowfang White Scalp. Nothing noticeable on this trash. They do have frost armor, the White Scalps, so you're going to be slowed down just a little bit, your attacks as well as your movement speed. Again, it's not too much of a big deal. The first couple of mobs in this dungeon are very, very low level. And remember how we talked about level scaling in the stockades? I think this dungeon is an even bigger violator of that fact, The mobs scale from like level 18 to I think 26 in this dungeon. So you have an 8 level range of mobs you can kill, which is pretty darn wide. I just love the vibe in this place, guys. I'm sorry, but you just feel like you're in a freaking keep. Like you feel like you're invading a castle through this side keep, through this side entrance, and you can see the damage. Look at all the tables that are just cracked and broken, and the chairs that are thrown sideways, and the bones on the ground. You can see how much damage this group of invaders has done to this place, and it's really, really cool. Another mechanic to watch out for in this first pack of mobs, the Bleak Wargs, which are the dogs, cast a spell called Unwavering Will, or I think Wavering Will. Essentially, it slows down your casting speed and your movement speed by like 25%. So you definitely want to be careful of that. It's not a big deal, but it lasts for 60 seconds. And if you're a tank trying to pick up aggro, it's actually pretty significant. So we're coming up to the first boss right now, who is Rethilgore. He just has one ability called Soul Drain, where he can immobilize you for 10 seconds and drains 35 health per second from you while you're immobilized. But aside from that, he's pretty easy. Obviously, the most difficult part about the boss is the fact that there are so many adds next to him, and they pretty much all pull when you'll pull them. So you're going to have to be dealing with like 4 or 5 different mobs as you're attacking Rethilgore. But aside from that, it's a pretty much straightforward tank and spank. I highly recommend, if you do have a hunter or a warlock in this group, try to have the Voidwalker or the pet off tank at least one of the mobs to give you guys a little bit more space and a little bit more room to heal up your tank, because if you don't, tanking 3 or 4 mobs at a time, even at level 21, 22, is going to be really, really difficult. You can see Rethilgore goes down pretty much without a fuss. Very easy boss. And we're going to come down and open up the gate here for our friend Ash Crombie, who's going to open up the courtyard door for us. Now, this is one of my favorite parts in this entire dungeon. In fact, one of my favorite parts in all dungeons in World of Warcraft since vanilla. And that is the courtyard door opening in Shadowfang Keep. So freaking intimidating. And right away, we pull accidentally. The courtyard in Shadowfang Keep, which is the area that was previewed at the start of the dungeon, is one of the most intimidating places in any zone in World of Warcraft. Because it's one of the few places where you see this many elite mobs scattered out in front of you. At the same time, there are so many paths in this courtyard that you can take, so many different directions where you can proceed in the dungeon, that it makes it seem like a zone in and of itself. You don't feel like you're in a dungeon anymore. I mean, I can go up the staircase, I can go through the kitchen, I can go around. There's some cages back here. There looks like there's a little bit of a stable over there. Now that said, let's talk about mechanics. The Shadowfang Moonwalkers over here, they cast a shield that essentially makes them immune to magic. So when you see this green shield come up, you're going to probably see your casters come up to the mob and start whacking him with their sticks, because he's immune to magic at that point. So it takes a little bit of a while to kill them when they do pop up that shield. And they do it pretty frequently, and it lasts for a pretty long time. So just make sure you're aware of that. The biggest problem with that mechanic is that a lot of casters aren't typically aware of aggro ranges, because they're so used to casting from far away that they'll run up to a mob and they'll accidentally aggro something else because they're so close. But melee typically shouldn't worry about that too much. We're used to it. Now I've switched over to the other group real quick because I want to show you guys a couple of things that happen on this next pull. I decide to pull the Shadow Charger, and I completely forget that it also pulls the Fell Steeds that are in the stable as well. Now the Shadow Charger and the Fell Steeds do a lot of damage, as you can see there, as well as a stun ability, and it's an AoE stun, so I die pretty much right away. However, because my group is so overleveled, they survive and they clear out this group. But I'm talking like really overleveled. I'm talking like average group level 28, which is much higher than anything else you'll see in this dungeon. The final boss, Arugal, is level 26, and the lowest level mobs in this dungeon are level 18. Now these horses do have a chance to drop a 10-slot bag, which is pretty cool. So again, just keep that in mind. Probably the most annoying part of this entire dungeon, in fact, one of the most annoying parts in all vanilla dungeons, period, is this Haunting Spirit. So these Haunting Spirits spawn on anybody with this 5-minute debuff called Haunted, I think, and they're super annoying. They spawn like every 30 seconds or something like that. I don't know the exact time frame, but if a couple of people in your group get the debuff, which is pretty common in this dungeon, you're basically going to have a situation like I do here, where a spirit is almost always on your healer. And this debuff comes from the Haunted Servitors, which we're killing right now. As you can see, I've got it on me, as well as a couple of other people in the group. So these spirits are just going to be spawning left, right, and center, which is super annoying. So here we have Razorclaw the Butcher. Very simple tank and spank fight. There's nothing too important about him except his loot, which is actually pretty good. He drops a knife or an axe, a one-handed axe, called Butcher's Cleaver, as you can see here. He also dropped it in the other run. I think it's around a 10% drop, so we kind of got a little bit lucky there. But basically, it's a 1.7 speed axe, one-handed, and it's level 20. So now we're progressing from the kitchen into the dining hall of this dungeon. Again, a really cool progression going from the Butcher's Kitchen to the actual dining hall or the mess hall, whatever you want to call it, of this keep. More ambience, more flavor. I talk about this too much, but I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to this stuff. Immersion is really, really cool, and it's something that I feel like the game has been missing almost since vanilla. I mean, Burning Crusade had some of it too, but I think a lot of it was lost somewhere after vanilla was launched. All right, Baron Silverlane. Let's talk about this guy real quick. He has an ability called Veil of Shadow that he just casted on me right now. It's a 15-second debuff that reduces healing by 75%. So you have to be very, very careful when you have that debuff, because if you have it, you're basically not going to get healed. Now, the Haunting Spirits are not a part of the boss mechanics. They're spawning because of that curse that we got earlier on, and it's super annoying, as you can see. These things just spawn every couple of seconds. I think like every 10 seconds, honestly. And they are absolutely a pain in the butt to deal with. I just can't get over how annoying they are, honestly. It's pretty annoying, but at the same time, it gives Shadowfang Keep this unique identity. Okay, we're coming up on one of the most annoying trash packs in this entire dungeon, and that is the Wailing Guardsman packs. These guys silence you for about 5 seconds, I believe, and there's the debuff right there. Obviously, if they silence you, you can't heal, so make sure if you're a healer, you're out of their AoE range, because they cast it in an AoE. Now, this wasn't a problem on this pull right now, but you can see where it becomes problematic later on when you have like 3 or 4 guardsmen in a single pull. Now we're coming up to Commander Springvale. He has a Hammer of Justice spell that actually stuns you for 5 seconds, which is something to keep note of. And he also casts a heal on himself, which is another thing. Now, he's also next to 2 Wailing Guardsmen. So again, if you're a healer, be very careful because you're going to get silenced. Our healer got silenced here as well because he stayed in melee range. It's not his fault. He probably didn't know. And as a result, I do go down. But now that he's further away, he's not going to be silenced by that guardsman, and they'll be able to survive the rest of this pull. Finally, I forgot a third ability. He does cast an immunity. So you just have to be careful. He casts a bubble, and that can be pretty annoying. This boss actually has a pretty interesting history. When he was remade in Cataclysm, in the very beginning of Cataclysm, I'm talking about right when the game launched, that first couple of weeks to a month, he was actually one of the hardest bosses in the entire game. If you could tank this fight in early Cataclysm, you were considered to be one of the better tanks out there. Springvale does drop a pretty darn good shield called Commander's Crest. It's a level 23 blue shield with strength and stamina on it, as well as spirit, I believe. Very good item. Highly recommended, especially if you're a tank. He doesn't drop it here, unfortunately. He drops his other green, which is an Arced War Axe. Alright, so here we're coming up to one of my favorite parts in Shadowfang Keep. It's not the flashiest part of the dungeon, but when it comes to an immersion perspective, and you know me and my immersion, right? It's one of the best areas in this entire dungeon. We just entered this castle, this keep, and we're going in to infiltrate it from the ground floor. What's the first thing we come across? A closed gate. We can't get in. So we've got to infiltrate from the side entrance, and we've got to go in, break this guy out of jail so he can open up the courtyard door for us. We've got to traverse the courtyard, this really intimidating courtyard here, and then we've got to run through the kitchen, the butcher's kitchen. After the butcher's kitchen, we've got to run through the mess hall, climb a tower, fight the tower commander, until finally we're on these beautiful, beautiful ramparts here. You can see some of Silverpine on your right-hand side of these ramparts, and on the other hand, you can see the courtyard and everything you've beaten coming up this way. You feel like you're literally ascending the dungeon. Like you're progressing, you're experiencing this micro-progression throughout this dungeon where you are literally climbing to the top, beating better bosses, and getting better loot. It's a really nice manifestation of the concept of progression in general. The idea of starting from the bottom and rising to the top progressively, slowly, by defeating various arduous tasks. It's a very, very cool concept, and seeing it manifested in physical form in a dungeon on a micro level is really, really cool. And I think that encapsulates vanilla so well. This concept of progression from starting at the bottom and slowly working your way towards the top, defeating task by task that are getting progressively harder. That's what vanilla is all about, and I think that's what RPGs are all about, man. And we just don't see it anymore. I mean, we just don't see it anymore. You start off so powerful on the live game right now, and I don't like it. It feels like you're going backwards instead of forwards. But I'll talk about Legion and Modern WoW in another video. I want to give you guys my thoughts on the live version of the game at some point, so you can understand where I'm coming from. But for now, we'll continue here. I don't want to talk about it too much in this video. Now here we have a rare spawn, ladies and gentlemen. The Deathsworn Captain is actually up in this dungeon, and as a result, we've pulled 4 elites, which is quite damaging and could possibly result in a wipe. If you're coming in at level 21 to 22, 23, you will wipe in this situation. Now, the Deathsworn Captain does have 3 different abilities. The first one is Battle Stance, which is irrelevant for the most part. The second one is Hamstring, so he can't slow you down if you're trying to run away. And the third one is Cleave, so just make sure you're standing behind him if you're a melee DPS. And he does drop a decent amount of loot. I love these ramparts, bro. I can't get over it. I can't freaking get over it. It's so cool how much you can see from up here. This is a freaking experience that you go through. You spend an hour here. It takes a long time, but you start at the bottom, you climb to the top, you meet Drake on the way, and you just have a great time. Such a well-designed dungeon, man, in so many different ways. And we take it for granted now because this game has been out for so long. But I will not stop praising this dungeon. And whoever designed the layout of this dungeon, honestly, great job. You did fantastic here. So we're coming up to these Shadowfang Rage Tooths, which actually enrage. It's their only ability, but it does make them do a lot more damage. And you can see them physically grow as they're enraging. So the more you see them grow, the more you should think to yourself, oh crap, I'm getting into trouble. And you want to kill them as soon as possible. This room, yo. This room has some of the coolest music in the history of WoW. And I'm going to play some for you right now. Hold on a second. Sorry guys, sometimes, few times admittedly, in WoW you come across some really good music. Obviously the Grizzly Hills theme is one of the popular tunes in this game, as well as the Howling Fjord music. But this music right here, for whatever reason, it hits me, man. It hits me. I love the kind of market-esque feel to it, like you're entering some kind of bazaar. I don't know how to explain it. But at the same time, it's got this like nice dramatic climax at the end. But here we're coming to one of the most difficult pulls in this entire dungeon, and one of the most annoying adds in this dungeon, which are the Lupine Horrors. Now, this is a chaotic pull, obviously. You can't really see what's going on, and I think we get lucky in this case and we survive. But in my previous group, the level 21, 22 group, we obviously died actually, I think 2 or 3 times on this pull. We wiped 2 or 3 times. Because it's actually a pretty difficult pull to pull off. Now, why is that? Well, the Lupine Horrors spawn additional mobs called Lupine Delusions. And I think each one of them spawns an additional 2 Lupine Delusions, and they're also elite mobs. So essentially, when you're pulling 1, you're pulling 3. Now, they have very little HP, so if you switch to them and kill them, you can take them down pretty easily. But of course, it's vanilla, there's very little AoE abilities, and unfortunately, a lot of people just don't tap target for whatever reason. So unless you tap target and take down the Lupine Delusions, you're going to have a very difficult time on those pulls. Now this room also debuts the Son of Arugal, which is another type of mob that you can kill in this dungeon. He does have a curse ability, a 5-minute curse that casts shadow damage on you every 60 seconds, I believe. It's not too significant, but it's definitely something to keep an eye out for just in case. And in this room is Fenrus the Devourer. Talk about his abilities real quick. He has a dot called Toxic Saliva, which just does some damage over time on a particular target. At the same time, it drains your mana after a certain amount of time. So if he casts this on a caster, then it might do a little bit more damage to him than if he casted it on like a melee who doesn't have mana. But aside from that, he's pretty much a tank and spank, very easy to deal with. And his loot is unfortunately not that good. But I like this. I like the idea of some bosses not having very good loot. Now, I don't like the idea of bosses having no loot, unfortunately, like the stockades. But the idea of bosses dropping greens and sometimes blues is really appealing to me. It just makes items so much more valuable and rare, which is something that I think got taken away in Wrath of the Lich King. This is where I think the Voidwalkers used to spawn, right? Am I right or am I wrong? I remember Voidwalkers used to spawn up here. I could totally be wrong, but I remember they did. Now we're climbing up here to the next boss, who is Wolfmaster Nandos. I believe you pronounce his name. A pretty easy boss, but keep in mind, the second you pull the wolves in this room, first of all 4 of them pull, and when you do pull them, he pulls immediately afterwards by default. So make sure you know that before you pull any of the wargs in this room. You can pull the boss right away. And obviously the most annoying warg in this pull are the lupine horrors that can spawn delusions here. We dealt with them, but barely. I mean, I almost died. I think the warlock almost died as well. And we are an over-leveled group. You can see Nandos running right away towards us. He pulls right after that pull. He technically has 3 abilities, but it's pretty much the same ability every time. He can summon a warg to attack you. Now, he can summon either a bleak warg, a lupine horror, which is super annoying, or the third warg. I forgot what it was called, but the bleak warg and the other one are pretty much insignificant. It's the lupine horrors that are annoying to deal with. Make sure you stun them if you can, interrupt them however you can, but if they spawn those delusions, focus the delusions, guys. No need to wipe on a simple boss like this. Just focus the delusions so you're not dealing with 3 elites instead of 1. And now, for the final room. After we've traversed this giant keep, we've ascended the ramparts, we've climbed the towers, we infiltrated through the butcher's kitchen. We are coming up to the last and final boss of this dungeon, Arugal himself. One of the coolest bosses considering his level. Remember, for the most part, guys, this is going to be the second dungeon for the majority of players. In fact, if you're Alliance, you probably won't even do this dungeon. But it's a very early dungeon, and despite that, it's got some really cool mechanics. Now, I've talked about the trash, but I want to talk about this final boss, who is very climactic and deserves the title of final boss because he is very, very strong. And he is level 26, which is much higher than the level 18 mobs in the beginning of the dungeon. And he does a lot of pretty cool stuff. So here we go, ready to pull Arugal, and I'm going to run up right now and do so. So this boss has 4 abilities. That's a lot for a beginning boss, even on today's standards. Having 4 abilities is a lot, man. I mean, Magmadar has like 1, right? Basically the fear, we talked about that in another video. He's got 4 abilities at level 26. And they're all really, really strong. First and foremost, his Void Bolt does a crap ton of damage. It does like 300 damage per hit. I've got 1k HP. 3 of those things will kill me. It's ridiculous. The second spell he has is Thundershock, which stuns you for 5 seconds and does damage. 5-second stun. Are you freaking kidding me? On top of a crazy Shadow Bolt. Third spell, Shadow Port. The most annoying spell for melee players in this dungeon. And if you're melee, you're pretty much going to do nothing on this fight, just letting you know. But basically, he ports around from each side of the room, and you have to run down the staircase and back up the other staircase in order to hit him. Really annoying. He does it really frequently, and it makes things very difficult from a DPS side. So if you've got a lot of range, definitely good on this fight. And then his 4th and most annoying ability, Arugal's Curse. He transforms one of you guys in the group into a Shadowfang glutton, essentially mind controlling you for 10 seconds. It takes you out of the fight, obviously you're MC'd, but you also attack the other members of your team, which is also annoying. So picture this for a second. You have 1 range in this group. You brought a mage. The rest of you are rogues and warriors, which is common in vanilla. Everybody rolls a rogue or a warrior. Your only damage dealer that can actually deal damage when the boss is on both platforms is cursed. On top of that, your healer is stunned from Thundershock. And on top of that, you're taking 300 damage shadow bolts to the face. And on top of that, he's teleporting around like some kind of freaking Houdini. Crazy. At level 26, fellas. Crazy dungeon, crazy boss, excellent climactic experience, wraps the entire dungeon up perfectly. One of the best dungeons in any game, period, is climaxed perfectly by Arugal. Whoever designed this boss, whoever designed this dungeon, absolute genius. Fantastic end to a fantastic dungeon. I love this place. And I love the remake too. But thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Quick thing before I go regarding last week's giveaway winner. So if you guys don't know this, if you didn't see my other video, in my second giveaway video, I did post a riddle as usual, but it was actually really, really hard and nobody could really figure it out. So I decided to post another riddle instead on Twitter. And just a couple of days ago, somebody figured it out. So congratulations to Nareem. The answer to the riddle was Edward the Odd. If you want to see the riddle, you can just check me out on Twitter at tipsout1. Congratulations to you. And I'm currently working with Nareem trying to figure out how we're going to give him the prize. He is from Europe, which makes things a little bit more complicated, but I think we'll figure something out. It shouldn't be too bad. If you enjoyed the video, sub it up and stick around because we got more coming. And as always, tips out, baby.